Yeah, it's actually
Collagen
finishing your
in the
combos
connective
is level
tissue has
70.
dissolved into sticky, delicious gelatin.
Level 60, you
and
literally
more
get
of that
nothing.
fat
You're
has
casting
melted, so it's more
stone and
moist
wind
and less
and
slimy.
whatever.
That is so good. And to make it dinner, you could just make a little pan sauce. I'll soak up any burned oil in the pan and deglaze with whatever liquid I see in the fridge, which today is cranberry juice. Sure. Dissolve the solids at the bottom of the pan, reduce the liquid until syrupy, then turn the heat off. And when it's barely bubbling anymore, drop in a little bit of butter. Just barely melt that in. Maybe throw in
I don't
some
even have my
parsley
revive.
leaves,
That's
and there,
funny.
pan sauce. I usually like to use alcoholic beverages for pan sauce because a lot of the sugar has been metabolized.
Oh yeah,
by
60.
the yeast.
You get at 62.
When you reduce down juice, it tends to be super sweet. Yeah, that is
I should become his black mage then.
You could use juice plus water, or water
when you do
plus a little
POTD, you
sweet
can't
vinegar,
revive
all
people,
kinds of
and it
things.
sucks.
Anyway, that is a tasty dinner, in part because it's my favorite way of butchering chicken thigh. We'll talk about that right after I tell you about the maker of this fine high-carbon steel pan that I've been using, Misen, the sponsor of this video. Misen makes incredibly robust cookware for the prices at which other companies sell you featherweight garbage. This is so heavy and solid, but it's not ready to use yet. Gotta follow the instructions. This is high-carbon steel, which is basically a hybrid of cast iron and stainless. First, you melt off the protective packing wax, and then you season the pan just like you would cast iron. This is seasoning wax, which I really recommend over oil. This actually smells good as it polymerizes into a natural nonstick coating. Beautiful. And you can slide that removable handle back on if you want. This pan gives you the even and rapid heating of stainless steel with the nonstick properties of cast iron. Pretty cool. And you can get 20% off this pan or anything else in your first order from Misen. Just hit my link in the description and use code Ragusia at checkout. You'll be doing us both a favor. 20% off your first order from Misen with my link and code in the description. Thank you, Misen.
Enjoy water
so here's
in your
the
cube.
three
Thank you.
basic ways that
You're
you can buy
welcome.
standalone chicken thighs. This one is skin on, bone in. There, that is the chicken's femur in there, the thigh bone. That's the whole intact thigh. Here's boneless, bone taken out, the skin still on. That's what we've been cooking so far. And here is boneless, skinless. That's obviously going to be the most expensive. That butchering is done by hand, even in big factories. Let's cook them side by side. A little oil, pepper, and salt, smoosh everything around. Intact, boneless, boneless, skinless. In the oven at like 375 Fahrenheit, 190 C, any temperature in that neighborhood will be fine. Half an hour later, they look like this. Internal temperature is, whoa, real hot. But that's fine. Thighs are bulletproof. You can way overcook them and they'll still be good. In fact, I'm going to turn my broiler/grill on to brown the tops of these a little bit more. Much nicer. Thighs are great for sheet pan dinners. I'm going to take out the deboned ones and let the bone-in thigh cook a little bit longer just to put it on equal footing. It's bigger, it's thicker, it needs a little bit more time. That was like 45 minutes total, much slower than the pan, but way easier. That boneless, skinless thigh, I probably cooked to like 210 Fahrenheit, 99 C internal temperature, and it's still pretty soft and juicy and tasty. Thighs are bulletproof. Boneless and skin on. Way tastier, in my opinion. Listen to that crisp skin. Unlike breasts, you can cook thighs to the point where most of the subcutaneous fat has rendered out and the skin is just totally crisp. Awesome. The bone-in thigh. It's easy to eat when you go to this part here, and that is indeed very tasty, except for that spot of burnt skin on the top. Bits of burned meat can taste kind of good. Burned skin is always gross. Once you start cutting in here, you run into that bone and it just gets in the way. It gets to be hard to eat around. And there's some grossness, some big hunks of cartilage, some slimy blood vessels and tendons. Certainly easier to eat if you just pick it up, but the area right around the bone is honestly a little bit undercooked and underflavored. Thing is, it's easy to buy thighs totally intact. It's easy to buy them boneless and skinless, but it can be hard to find them skin on, bone out. So let's talk about boning them out ourselves. I was reading this article in Poultry Science, as one does, about a new method of deboning chicken. Dislocation of articular cartilage followed by stripping periosteum. The articular cartilage is the stuff on either ends of the femur, where the hip and knee joints were. According to this article, you cut through the cartilage, pull it off the bone, and then just pull the meat down. Strip the periosteum, which is the tissue connecting the meat to the sides of the bones. I could not make that work. Let me know if you can. Here's my method, which is crude but real easy. If you have one, use a boning knife, which is a very thin blade. You can get them for cheap because they're stamped, not forged. Stamping out a steel sheet is cheaper than forging it like you do for a chef's knife. One cut down the middle, right on top of the bone. Then one cut down along the side of the bone, but not all the way through to the board, just down as deep as the bone goes. Same cut on the other side, and I'm not worrying about the ends of the bone
Time
near
to
the
play the
joints,
next
just the
trail
middle section of the bone.
Cringe.
Now I can very carefully slide my knife up underneath the middle
But now
of the bone
everything,
like that.
all the first
In,
9 games
under,
are
and
out.
the other side. Saw a little bit
In
to make a
English.
bigger hole,
First
big
9
enough that you can
games.
stick your finger through and peek it out the other side. Hello. Now get that knife in there again, facing away from your finger, and saw
silly that sounds.
saw out until you can push all the way through,
Very.
and there, that's one joint free. And the other is
Sounds
easier.
great.
I just kind of lever the bone away and cut around that joint until it's free. Done. There's some waste, sure, but like I said, this is easy. It is neither fast nor best, but that's a perfect thing to freeze for stock or some such. Now, around where the joints were, there's going to be bits of cartilage. Those are gross. Feel around for them and slice them off. There will also be a few little bits of blubbery fat that won't render down all the way when you cook them. They will be slimy and gross. They should be right around the edge of the skin, just trim them
Oh,
off.
wait, A-flap.
There's that flap
Yep.
of skin
Yeah.
hanging
Bed.
off the side. Not all butchers give that to you, but this one did. I trim it off mostly because right under where it meets the meat, there's going to be another blubbery bit of fat hanging out just under the skin. That tends to be slimy even after it's cooked. You could cut it or even scrape it off. Beautiful. That meat is now a super even thickness, so it's going to cook evenly. It's thin, so it's going to cook quickly, and you can flavor more of it. And that skin is going to be crispy and delicious. But say you don't want the skin. Well, lift it up, and you might need to reach in with your knife and open up that membrane underneath. Then you can just pull it off until you can't anymore. At that point, I just start cutting, and off it comes. Easy. I prefer skinless, boneless for most wet cooking methods, like stews. These make an insanely quick and tasty stew. I'll just cut a couple of thighs into chunks, remembering that the chunks are going to shrink in half as they cook. Into the oiled pan, season, and keep them moving to keep them from sticking to the pan or each other. Just stir, stir, stir until they're basically cooked, brown on the outside and just about cooked through on the inside. Maybe in with some sliced shallots, fry those a little bit, and then time to deglaze with my old buddy white wine. So good for chicken stew. And I reckon baby carrots or big chunks of adult carrots will cook in about the same time that it takes for that meat to go soft. Cover and reduce to a simmer. Check on it every now and then just to make sure that nothing is sticking and the liquid isn't all evaporating. If it is, I'd supplement with water, not more wine. Too much reduced wine would be really strong. Here we are like half an hour later. Everything is tender. Let's thicken and enrich that with a little cream. Super Frenchy this stew is. Simmer the cream until thick. Taste for seasoning and add anything that it needs, like salt. Drop in some fresh thyme or other herb, and you could have that over egg noodles or rice or something, or you could just put it in a bowl, maybe mop up the sauce with some crusty bread. Thigh meat is so much more succulent in stews than breast meat is. But let's finish this off with the easiest option. You could totally just throw the whole intact thigh into a pot. Brown both sides just to create some flavor in there. Throw in whatever vaguely Latin American seasonings you have. Fry them for a sec, then just about cover everything with water. Reduce the heat to a simmer, cover the pot, wait maybe an hour until the meat feels like you could easily pull it off the bone. Pull those out and let them cool until you can handle them. Meanwhile, you could drop some veggies in here and make a soup, or you could do what I usually do, which is boil this down to a glaze. You don't need to stir it at all until it gets really thick. That's when it could stick and burn. Because we left the skin on those thighs, we dissolved a lot of gelatin out of it. That sauce is going to be luscious as it is, but you could augment it with a little vinegar or other acid, or maybe a little honey or other sweetener, and that is a super tasty coating for this chicken that we'll now pull off and shred. When the skin is cooked wet, I think it's kind of gross and I don't actually want to eat it.
The
Take it
guy,
off.
the
As you
gay
pull meat
dating
off
app
the bone,
Grinder
note
says
the
if
articular
Florida doesn't
cartilage at
stop
the ends of
passing
the bone where the
homophobic
joints
and
were. Nobody
transphobic
wants to
laws,
bite into
they
that.
will
Oh, yeah, I
release
saw
Easily
that.
pull it off now that
Republic
everything is cooked
legislator
soft.
and party
Some people
official who has
debone
secretly
and
used
shred
this
chicken
app.
with forks.
Oh, yeah.
I
Hell
think
yeah.
That's crazy. If you use your fingers, you can feel for the bits of
They should just
cartilage
do it.
or unrendered fat
Yeah.
or anything else that you
YOLO.
don't want to eat. And if you're going to be tossing this in a sauce, don't shred it down all the way.
It's just
gonna
all
shred some
Lindsey
more as
Graham.
you stir it in the sauce. Hey, there. I don't know if that's a tendon or a blood vessel, but I felt that it was slimy, so I can take it out.
My
In
list
that
of
sauce it
45
goes.
things
For my
a
taste,
gay
I wish I
character
had
needs
reduced that glaze
in
a
order
little
for
thicker,
me
but that's still
to
going to
think
make for a
they're
darn tasty
necessary.
taco with some
does that
green
mean?
stuff on top and a squeeze of lime to boot. I am a thigh man all day long.
Got a line. All right. Let's go buy some
Or that
pots
is,
of
I
aether
got a
oil.
loin.
A A loin.
loin in?
Why are you getting
Yeah, I got a loin.
Why are you getting loins?
Got a loin.
Tenderloins?
My loins are tender.
I don't. Okay, Google, unhear that sentence.
You're the one who said it.
No, I said. You said. It sounded like
You were
you
asking
said
about my
loins.
loins.
That should be your character naming game.
Tender loins.
Tenderloins.
Or Maloins.
My loins.
Maloins.
Maloin.
Maloins seems like it could be an Ishgardian like surname.
Tender Maloins.
Walter Maloins.
Next, woo 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 woo. We got the next part of our thing completed. Well,
thing?
just about. Animal weapon.
Oh, what part do you want?
Aether oil.
Oh, you did all the dungeons?
Yeah.
Darn. Now I have to do them by myself.
Got it.
That's the worst part for me. I don't want to walk through the dungeons.
Oh,
Takes-
I was what was I doing? Oh, when I was making my last set of food, I would just sit in queue for dungeons while I was gathering. And then if it popped, it popped. If not, it didn't.
Wait, you random synced?
Yeah, why don't you just run them unsynced?
Because I'm level 60.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Freaking weirdo.
That's a Q moment.
Yeah, he made it even
True.
worse. than
Yeah,
could've
you made
been.
it worse. You actually ran the dungeon.
Oh.
Oh, okay, this is the strat. How you do it is, you do it through leveling roulette, and you just hope that you get the next dungeon you need for that thing, and eventually
Yeah,
itself.
I was doing it for book too. Like if I had a level 60 book that needed it, I would just run it.
Nice.
What am I doing? Oh, you buy Aether oil. Okay.
Yeah.
Someone remind me to get a new book next week.
Get a new book next week.
Oh, thank you. It's funny that you just go to Azys Law to do this.
Hilarious.
Sorry, what'd you just say?
Anyway. It's
I
funny
did,
that
and I just
it's
blanked
funny.
out.
It's funny that like all the steps to the weapon, you have to go to Azys Law to turn them in.
Oh yeah, that's so
Just so
lame.
random. Yeah. I mean, I guess it makes sense because Allegan, but
I hate them.
Elegant.
True.
highest little prick.
Can I stop missing? I'm dying to dragons here. Cause my attacks won't hit. There's one. That it? Oh, hey, Sarkenza. Look, I have to watch his whole back catalog now, except the really boring ones. That one was boring, where you just made a food. A fun Sarkenzo fact, if he's probably already gone. Fun Sarkenzo fact, he says he's gonna be around soon.
Nice.
To do what?
On Wednesdays. I don't know, to hang out on Wednesdays specifically.
He's scheduled Wednesdays.
He's budgeted us in
For Wednesdays. How
for
nice of him.
Wednesdays.
We can teach him this raid tier.
There's no way he will play 14. Or he will sub and throw away his money. I guess he could do that. I mean, I'm not opposed, I'll believe it when I see it.
This rod looks goof.
Finishing your seed queue.
No, I'm probably gonna play Tails.
What tails are you playing?
Azure.
Tails or trails?
Tails.
Trails.
Azure.
Trails.
Trails of what?
Tails.
The bad one.
Why do you keep calling it Tails? It's not Tail. Trails.
Trails. You're right.
Trails.
I've never played the game before in my life. Trails to Azure.
Which one is that? Which
Second crossbow.
crossbow? Which one is crossbow?
The middle two. The ones that just got translated.
Who? What?
Lloyd Bannings in the special support section. The SSS. The cops. Not Reen,
Yeah,
not
you play
Liberal
as a
News Media.
Pig.
The other one.
Hey, when they translate these games, is it like, like you playing this one? Is it a backwards in gameplay versus
Yes.
like Cold Steel? It is,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. 'Cause this is an older one.
Yeah.
I think I watched Creepy play this one. Some of it.
Yeah. So this one was translated by a fan translation group, and then the translation got bought by Nisa, and then they released ports of the Evo version.
Good for them.
They released ports of the what version?
The Evo version, so they do an upgraded. For all the PSP ones, they re-released them on Vita and like PS4.
I mean, does that just mean more graphics?
More graphics and they like retconned some stuff.
The heck? I didn't sign
So
up for
the
retconning.
the Toa from Cold Steel, the class president who's older than you,
Mhm.
shows up in these games because she goes to the trade conference in Bonerland games, but she wasn't a thing when Crossbell was being
Oh, I see.
made.
The retconned.
Oh, hey, do you guys want to do us for Orthos run?
Right now?
No, not right now. I'm just saying. It takes around maybe like 6-ish hours, maybe 7 for a first time.
Sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, we can do it sometime. I don't know anything. I've never stepped foot in the dungeon yet.
Yeah, that's fine. I can basically solo it. Right. So it's fine.
Wow.
All right, Brittany says he's gonna carry us.
Yeah, we'll just watch.
I guess do you want to tank? Yeah, you should probably tank.
Me? I don't care what I do. Sure.
You have to put interrupt on your bar and stun.
I will not tank.
I have interrupt.
I can
Bard has interrupt.
Yeah, we should do a run at us four. I finished it once and it's not too bad, honestly. It's pretty simple. Do you Q, are you busy Wednesdays still watching TV?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it ends at 8. My time.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so...
And then after we clear, you guys can carry Dave.
Just got given 286 swordfish.
The good news, I have tomorrow off.
What do you have tomorrow off?
I was supposed to do jury duty, so I took the whole day off, planning on getting canceled, and it got canceled.
They have to pay for jury duty.
Yeah, I was gonna clock it in as jury duty if I had jury duty, but it got canceled, so I just wanted to take the day off.
Do you lose a day off?
No.
Like I don't.
Well,
I don't
I have unlimited PTO. Well, I have
Oh, that's
designated time off,
cringe.
which is worse. But
Wasted cringe.
they like if we have jury duty, we code our time off as jury duty.
Oh, I see.
I've never gotten juried in my life.
Neither have I. My dad has 5 times.
I mean, I've never even gotten like selected for potential.
Oh, summoned? This is my first time in like 8 years.
I think Kay has been summoned twice, and the first time, she somehow weaseled her way out. But then, I think because she didn't go the first time, they called her back. I don't know how that works either, to be honest. But she got called like 2 different instances within like the last 5 years.
Yeah. The like waiting period is like 2 years, I believe.
I see.
At least in Texas. I don't know what it is in New York.
She also told me that like the case, she got like called. She was like the 200th person called. I guess because she lives in New York.
Yeah.
But she had to take her own time to call back the court to find out if she was selected.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
That's
normal.
that's normal.
Yeah,
Okay.
I had a coworker, and that's what he had
Oh
to do as
god,
well.
what the fuck? That's so stupid. Okay, that's the part that like made me like, I was just like, what the hell?
I think
But
it would
yeah.
be fun to be selected for jury duty. I want to be selected sometime.
Yeah, I would not mind. I mean, I'm totally fine with being
I
on
want
a
to
jury,
cross-examine
but
a parrot.
Same.
That's how it
But
works.
the problem is I always end up being like when my thing doesn't get canceled, I'm usually the last of the people who get called in to for the jury selection process, and so like I never have a chance of being selected. which is
Just
annoying.
one question, Your Honor.
Usually, they'll take the first like 20 people have a pretty good chance, and I've always been like number 40, which is the last person that's left. So like the last time I went and sat in, they didn't even ask me like jury selection questions. They just ignored me the whole time. So I just had to sit there and listen to this case
I mean, I would
where
ignore
nothing
you.
happened. Yeah, same.
Thanks. My next Wilderness Slayer task is mammoths. No one ever PvPs at mammoths. I'm safe.
I'm safe.
Oh, prayer's my lowest level skill now. That's wacky.
Do you think they'll ever release another new race? I guess they released Viera recently.
They said they are not going to do it ever.
Oh, nice.
Wait, really?
I mean, I guess maybe never say never, but they have no plans to ever add another race because they have to add female Hrothgars.
Oh.
And the Viera Hrothgar thing is already a train wreck, so like why would they do more? They say with friends like these, who needs more?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Oh, but so the first time that I made it to jury selection, the case was that the guy got a ticket for he was in a park where his dog was not on a leash, but it said all dogs must be on a leash.
So
and
you threw the book at him. He's in jail for 50 years.
He was pro se representation, and he was like a gigantic jackass the whole time. It was very funny. He's just like, he's not gonna win. Nobody liked him. The judge kept being like, I need to speak with you, and calling him up to the bench and being like, you can't say that.
Damn.
And his argument was like, it's just a sign, right? Like, how are we supposed to know? I couldn't see it. So they're like, there's a lot of signs.
How
all over
can
the park.
signs be real if our eyes aren't real?
Yeah, like nobody told me it was just on a sign, and they're like, okay. So I was sad that I didn't get to, throw the book at some guy who violated a leash law.
Cross-examine his parrot.
Yeah, well, I had to cross-examine his dog, but
Alright, will I get PK delivering these bones? Talon, don't call in the Germans, please. This prayer.
Oh yeah, we loves the PK.
Yeah, the Germans aren't even awake at this time. You're safe.
I know. Well, that's why I play on when I'm in the PvP area. I go to a German server.
Smart.
Maybe. I mean, PKers could have the same idea.
True.
Oh, speaking of, I'm about to get PK'd. Whee!
What do you do? You just run away?
Yeah, I just saw a dot on the map. Did he go away? I yumped. He yumped! I psyched him out, dude. He thought I was gonna jump. You just got frickin' played, idiot.
I can't imagine living my life in fear when I play a video game.
Well, that's great. I love fear.
Alright, I'm off for the night, guys. See ya!
See ya.
Okay, bye!
This macro runs the risk of getting screwed by a proc, I think. I guess I could include one extra touch just to cover it.
Dude, I love this PvP area is so wild. You get like 300% XP from a consumable item here, and it's like, if I can be here for 10 seconds unmolested, I've already paid for, like, even if they take everything else. Just got a free prayer level, basically. Because the game just said, here you go. Have everything for free.
It's not. There it goes.
Hmm?
I'm in the Crystarium.
Alright, well that was good prayer XP. Wildly good.
Oh, I get to meld stats onto this rod?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, do I just go crit indirect hit as per usual?
Sure. It's very important. Whatever you choose, know that it's more important than anything you could ever do on your fake level 60
On your level
weapon.
50 relic weapon.
With 60.
It's a level
bitch.
60, yeah.
No. This guy's dumping poetics into his 60 weapon.
I need something to dump poetics into.
Like next or like patch 0.4 or whatever, that'll let us dump poetics into this current relic weapon.
Yeah.
Unless they do something wonky.
Probably won't be until next expansion, right? I don't know.
Well, it's currently red tomestones for the thing, so those should get converted to poetic costs.
Hmm.
The next steps might be green tomestones, but the old steps should become poetics. All right, Q, you've signed off. Go finish the seed.
No, I'm about to play Trails.
Don't play that bad game. Finish the seed.
Legend of
it's-
Trash, Tails in my butt.
Yeah. Trails in my butt.
Although there's a horse on my obelisk. Getting kicked. Getting PK'd by mobs. That's not how this is supposed to work. There we go. Oops.
Alright, this should do it. Alright. Now.
Yeast tastes good. And no. So you've got your tomatoes in the ground or in your pots. Now what do you do?
What if you were Dante Hohenheim?
Tie and prune the... Late winter in the grassy parts of the world, you will very often see tufts of green bursting up, way ahead of all the other turf around them. Little green explosions of early spring, and they taste like onions, though I think those are technically garlic. Doesn't matter. The point is, there are wild alliums all around me. Free onions, free garlic, all around us right now, and it's all edible. Assuming that it hasn't been drenched in some noxious yard care chemicals or something.
I literally just got tricked by a pair of fake bunny ears.
These wild plants in my grass are particularly useful this dreary time of the year, when all of my herbs are either still frostbitten or just barely starting to grow green again. I'll be inside cooking something, sweet potato home fries in this case, parboil, drain, then saute until crispy. It'd be nice to have a bright hit of green on that plate, so I walk outside, I tear off a tuft, and there, unlimited free chives. I mean, these ones are not technically chives, I don't think, though chives do grow wild as well.
All right,
I'm
gonna go play games.
See ya. Immature greenery of any wild allium can be used just like chives. These wild ones are a little tougher, a little more fibrous than chives from the grocery store, so I make a point to slice them extra thin. That takes care of it. Delicious, fresh, oniony, garlicky flavor, and super pretty too. One reason these wild alliums come up ahead of everything else this time of year is that a lot of them, or most of them, grow from bulbs, just like this amaryllis that's about to bloom again. Amaryllis is actually related to alliums, and you can see that it's about to bloom again. It's growing from a bulb. Also related to alliums are daffodils. Plants like these that grow from underground bulbs are harbingers of spring because the bulb is full of last year's sunshine. It's an energy store filled with carbs the plant can use to get a head start on the next growing season. Wait, you're telling me these little blades of onion grass have tiny little subterranean bulbs on them, like the bulb of an onion or garlic? Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. Most of them, though probably not as big. Find an older, more established specimen, grab it securely near the ground, and pull, slowly but firmly so nothing snaps. Check it, there's the bulb. Smaller than a modern domestic variety, but still totally edible and quite tasty. Actually, I think it's a bit stronger and more peppery than domestic onions and garlic. Maybe not great for eating raw, but those pungent sulfuric compounds at least tell me that I am actually eating some kind of edible allium, and not a deadly poisonous plant that just happens to look like an edible allium. Wild alliums can look almost identical to a number of plant species known commonly as death camas, and they are as bad as they sound. Here's one of the few case reports I was able to find where somebody got sick eating what they mistook for a wild allium. 50-year-old Navajo guy in northeast Arizona went for a walk in the woods with his daughters and dug up what he thought was a wild onion. Turns out it was Zygodanus paniculatus, a member of the lily family known as foothill death camas. It's filled with toxic alkaloids, and as such, it tastes extremely bitter. The daughters both tasted it and then spit it out because it was extremely bitter, because evolution works. We generally don't like the taste of things that are acutely toxic to us, but the dad swallowed half of it before he realized that it was not an onion, and he got real sick within hours, like violent vomiting. Ataxia, which is loss of muscle control. Paresthesias, which is pins and needles running up and down his arms. He literally stumbled into the emergency room with scary low blood pressure. They gave him IV fluids and had him swallow activated charcoal, and luckily he was able to go home the next day. His family found the plant and sent it to the University of Arizona at Tucson, and yeah, it was foothill death camas, which poisons grazing animals all the time if they're poorly fed and desperate enough to eat something super bitter. That Arizona dad got off relatively easy. So the lesson here is smell the plant before you eat it. Tear it open, unleash those enzymatic processes that make those pungent sulfur compounds that we know and love from onions and garlic. Smell it. Only onions and garlic smell like onions and garlic. Nothing else does. The death camas smells and tastes nothing like this. Another lesson here, especially if you're a dad or a mom, is maybe buy some life insurance, which you can do with the sponsor of this video, Policy Genius. My wife and kids would be in serious financial trouble if I got hit by a bus or ate a poison plant right now. My labor pays the bills around here, and I have dragged my feet getting life insurance because the process can be really complicated and daunting. Not so at policygenius.com/Adam Ragusia. I just
was.
put in some basic info and tell them what I want. I just want term life insurance, which is the cheapest. I just want to make sure that if I bite it in the next 20 years, my kids will have enough cash to get them grown up and through school. In minutes, you can compare personalized quotes from top companies to find the lowest price and coverage you need. You could save 50% or more on life insurance by comparing quotes with Policy Genius. They have licensed experts who work for me, not the insurance companies. And when I'm ready to apply, they handle all the paperwork and the scheduling for free. Hit my link in the description, policygenius.com/Adam Ragusia. Get your free life insurance quotes to find out how much you could save. Thank you, Policy Genius. Anyway, yeah, make sure you smell it before you eat it. Make sure that it smells like onions or garlic. Is this onions or garlic? Well, when the plants are this small, I don't think that distinction is particularly meaningful or important. It's hard to conclusively ID them until they grow big enough to flower, but these, I believe, are Allium vanille, which is known as wild garlic, or onion grass, or field garlic, crow garlic. It tastes kind of garlicky, but you're not going to be peeling any individual cloves with papery skins, so whether it's onions or garlic, I don't think really matters. Allium vanille grows natively all across Afro-Eurasia, but here in the Americas, it's actually invasive. Also in Australia too, apparently. It doesn't really cause much of a problem in yards other than making you smell like onions when you mow the lawn. But ranchers hate the stuff. If cattle graze on too much field garlic, those flavors show up in the milk and the meat, which could be kind of awesome, but I understand why some consumers might be put off. Also, if livestock eat a ton of field garlic, they can get a little sick. Remember, those pungent sulfur compounds in alliums are a chemical weapon designed to repel animals, mostly insects. But Allium vanille apparently has a high level of sulfides that can be a digestive irritant in farm animals, and for that same reason...
Time to do kill or save a queen. 2 us. Alright, what do I need to do? Unlocking fairy rings, regrouping, here we go. Guessing about this stuff. Water, pestle and mortar. Okay. Oh wait, I should probably take my new pouch.
Experts advise against humans eating wild garlic in enormous quantities, which you probably wouldn't do anyway. There are, of course, many other wild allium species that are commonly foraged. Here are some of them. And I think I have some of them growing in my lawn as well, particularly, I think, Allium canadense, or however you say that. It's this one over here. Unlike the tubular greens of the wild garlic, this has flatter, like U-shaped leaves, but they still smell and taste like onion. Allium canadense means Canada onion, but it's also called Canadian garlic, or meadow garlic, because the distinction between onion and garlic doesn't really matter with plants this little. And like I said, the wild alliums are most useful to me as a kind of emergency last-minute fresh herb. Like a couple of years ago, I was shooting this mushroom risotto recipe, and I realized that I had not gotten any kind of fresh herb to garnish it with, which is really, really important for the thumbnail. So I just walked outside to the front yard, snipped off some of whatever species that particular tuft is, and boom! Or bam, as a great man used to say when applying finishing herbs. Here in the American South, this supply of free, fresh herbs in the yard runs from, gosh, the second half of winter all the way until it gets really hot in the summer and the plants kind of die back. But then in the fall, they spring back up out of the bulbs again. They grow in recognizable clumps because the bulbs underground spin off other bulbs, which spin off into other bulbs, etc., etc. If you see just one or two little fine green hairs sticking up, those plants might have just recently taken root from the seeds that blew off of the flowers and into the wind from a plant that did not get mowed before it could flower. But if you find a clump that looks pretty big and beefy like that one, that's well established, meaning it's been there probably for many seasons. So the ground is full of big, delicious bulbs storing energy as sugar and starch. You can rip the whole clump up and fish out the individual bulbs. I want to stress again that even if the plant itself is non-toxic, it could be contaminated with toxic chemicals in the groundwater and such, so you probably want to forage in ground that you know and trust. Here's a really nice way to cook any small, pretty vegetables, not just yard garlic. Leave them whole, or maybe cut them in half to preserve their shape. Throw them in just enough water to boil/steam them. I might add a little more water as I go, but my goal is to have most of that water evaporated by the time the veggies are just fork tender. Then you turn off the heat, nothing should be bubbling anymore, and it's safe to melt in some butter. The butter will form an emulsion with the remaining water, which has concentrated onion garlic flavor in it. And you just get this beautiful silky glaze on them. Chop up some of the greens to use for garnish, and yeah, those are some Michelin star caliber yard onions right there. They taste delicious, though a little bit bitter compared to domestic alliums. Bitterness is one of the first traits that people breed out of vegetables when they start farming them, but it's not bothering me here at all. It's a nice, fresh counterpoint to the sweetness of last year's sunshine stored in those little bulbs. Go find you some free food in the yard, or the front garden. Brits would call it a garden. Farm in this little... This video is sponsored by Squarespace. I'm pleased to report that I successfully grew bread from the ground. I planted wheat in the fall, grew it over the winter, harvested it in late spring, cured it, threshed it, winnowed it, milled it, and baked it. It was a ton of work, resulting in probably the worst loaf of bread I've ever had. I can totally see why we went with the whole modern industrialized food system thing. It has its advantages, but this was a real fun thing for me to do nonetheless. Starting 8,000 or 10,000 years ago, I think it's safe to say most people on this planet would have spent at least some of their time participating in the growing and or processing of grain-based foods. To do it yourself is to feel in your bones what it was like to be human up until very recently, when these processes were mechanized in the developed world and people like me ceased to have any hand in them at all. Step 1 is plant some wheat seeds, otherwise known as wheat. The thing that we eat, that's the same thing that we put in the ground to get more of it. All grasses make seeds, even your lawn grass if you don't mow it down. Wheat is just a group of grass species that produce giant versions of those seeds. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors just picked those seeds off of the wild plants. This is a story told by Dr. Catherine Zabinski, an ecologist at Montana State University and author of Amber Waves, the extraordinary biography of wheat from wild grass to world megacrop.
They would likely have found is just scattered bunches of grasses on a hillside growing with a mix of a bunch of other grass species, maybe underneath oak trees.
When the grains are just ripening like that, they're soft. The carbs in there are kind of milky, so you can pick the seeds right off the plant and eat it raw. It doesn't really taste like anything, maybe a little sweet. Dr. Zabinski is pretty sure that's where it all started. People just eating kind of fresh, soft grains right off of the plant. But pretty soon, people started to eat dried grains, grains that either dried by themselves on the plant and maybe fell off, you can collect them off the ground like that, or grains that people dried themselves. Arguably, the chief virtue of grain as a food source is that when it is dried, it is preserved. You can carry it with you. You can eat it through the winter when there's less fresh food around.
We find grinding tools like you would use for grass seeds, as long ago as 30,000 years ago, before we find evidence of settlements. So very likely you'd have tools like that in areas where there were stands of wheat, and if you were nomadic and moving around to follow food sources, you'd arrive at the wheat and rye and other wild grasses at those stands during the season where you knew you could gather ripe grass seeds.
Suffice it to say, these would have been pretty meager meals. The seeds of ancient grass plants were a lot smaller than these. And these are hardly the creme de la creme. The only wheat I could find at a garden store was the stuff sold for animal feed, not for planting, so I have no idea what variety this is. It's probably a grab bag. Hey, there's some corn, bonus, I guess. I tilled my soil, just dug it up to loosen it so that the seeds can sink down in there, and I'm simply throwing them on the ground somewhat indiscriminately. This is a planting technique known as broadcasting. Hey, let's keep a running tally of common words or phrases that have their origins in the farming or processing of grains. That's number 1, broadcasting. This all started in what we now call the Middle East.
It was about 9,000 or 10,000 years ago when we've got the first evidence of people actually planting wheat seeds and growing a field of wheat.
You gotta admire the discipline it would have taken to do that. As I was planting, I just kept thinking, this is food that I'm just throwing on the ground. You gotta figure that ancient people, perpetually on the edge of starvation, they would have had trouble thinking months ahead instead of just eating what they already had in their hands. Hence the expression, don't eat your seed corn. It means don't allow your immediate desires to ruin your future. Corn in English used to mean any kind of grain, or more broadly, any small, hard thing. Though the grains started to get less small as humans began to farm them.
Definitely by the time of the ancient Greeks, there was fairly early on a sense of, we should save the big seeds, because that will help us to get better wheat plants next year and more.
As late fall came and the weather got cold and rainy, I noticed my wheat had sprouted. That little white curlicue there, that is the wheat sprout. And as it grows, you get what looks like blades of grass, because that's exactly what they are. This is what it looked like around Christmas. Here in the southern US, lawns in fancy neighborhoods will often be this kind of iridescent green in winter because people plant an annual crop of wheat or rye on top of their normal turf grass just so they can have a vibrant green lawn in the cold months. Look at this. This is where my kids spilled the bag of feed seed on the lawn.
Pick it up, Daddy.
I didn't till that ground or anything and the wheat still took root. Did real good. Now you might be wondering, why do people grow wheat in the winter? Why not grow it in the warm months when most other food is grown? Well, you can, and summer wheat is a thing. There are varieties that grow well when you plant them in the spring and then harvest them in late summer into the fall. But historically speaking, winter wheat was the main event, the main crop. The original wild wheat was a winter wheat, and that makes sense when you consider where wheat came from, the Middle East.
The plant would germinate in the fall, and then you'd have a cool, wet winter and not a lot happened, but you'd have these, short plants that overwintered, and then in the spring, once things warmed up, they were ready to grow, and they could complete their life cycle pretty quickly, which was important because the summers were really hot.
Indeed, when I first moved from the temperate northern U.S. to the sweltering southern U.S., I discovered that there are two winters down here. There's the cold winter and there's the hot winter. The dog days of summer when plants really struggle to grow and nobody really wants to be outside for very long. It's just like winter, but it's hot. Wheat comes from a place that has hot winter.
And as soon as the heat and the drought started, who cares for wheat? I mean, we're done. We've produced our seeds, and now we're just going to wait till the first fall rains when you've got, the soils are a little cooler, you've got some moisture, and we're going to germinate again.
But winter wheat can also do great up north, like Montana, where Dr. Zabinski is. A snow blanket insulates the plant through the coldest months. It was my birthday in March when I noticed the first ears on my wheat. That's what those are called, those little vertical stacks of seeds, or rather I should call them fruits. Grains are technically fruits because they grow out of tiny little flowers. It's interesting, planting wheat is a little bit of work. Harvesting and processing wheat is a lot of work, but in between, the half of the year in between those two acts, you kind of don't really do anything. You just make sure that animals don't trample it down or graze on it. Otherwise, you just let it grow. You can totally get a sense of why ancient people who successfully farmed grains also had time to build ziggurats and invent writing systems and new and interesting ways to kill each other for stupid reasons. Hence, civilization, with and without ironic air quotes. Everything with my little 50 square foot plot was going great until a big spring thunderstorm came and phoomp, most of it fell over. I thought that it might stand up again once the rain evaporated off, but nope. It just laid there in a tangled mess, exacerbated by the fact that I think I planted my wheat a little too densely. It's really bad when wheat falls over. It doesn't get as much light down there to grow big, plump grains, and it's a lot harder to harvest, is something that I'll show you. And when it's down there like that, it's way more susceptible to disease and infestation, things that generally come from the ground and that like the shady, damp conditions down there near the ground. At first, I thought that was dirt on the wheat there, but then I looked real close and nope. Those are aphids, little tiny bugs that suck the nutrient-rich sap out of tender plant parts. Ladybugs eat aphids, that's why ladybugs are a farmer's friend, but my aphids seem to be multiplying too fast for the ladybugs to keep up with. Why did this happen? Why did my beautiful wheat tumble over? Well, this can happen for a few reasons, but here's one of them.
If your variety of wheat is not adept at managing high nitrogen contents, sometimes the stems can grow too tall and then they tip over, which is called lodging.
Lodging. My wheat lodged, perhaps because I overfed it. I've worked really hard on that garden plot for many years, building up the soil nutrients with chemicals and compost. The original wild wheat rarely had dirt so good. It's just like with us people. Modern abundance has made nutrients so available to us that it causes certain parts of us to grow more than is optimal for our biofunctions. Same deal with the wheat. The plant gets too much nitrogen and water and sunshine. The stem grows too tall and it flops over before it can complete its reproductive cycle. Lodging wheat got to be a particular problem in the mid-20th century. Why? Because northern countries, like the United States, started to export their modern agricultural practices down to bright, sunny southern countries like Mexico. This was all part of an incredibly momentous event in human history known as the Green Revolution.
The Green Revolution was actually designed to help fight what they called the Red Revolution, or the spread of communism.
You gotta appease that proletariat before they rise up with the commies. You gotta keep them well fed, better fed than red. And this is why American capitalism, in the form of the Rockefeller Foundation, sent a guy named Norman Borlaug to Mexico. It is often argued that Norman Borlaug is one of the most important people whom most people have never heard of. The first thing he did down in Mexico was breed wheat that was resistant to
Alright, time to unlock my other spellbook.
No.
Good point. Well, I guess I have to start this first. Weird.
to a terrible fungal disease that they had down there called stem rust. At that point, he had these healthy plants, and he was boosting them with modern fertilizer and modern irrigation techniques. Job done, red menace abated, right?
But once you do that, especially in a climate that's fairly hospitable for plant growth, like parts of Mexico and Georgia, your plants grow really tall with extra fertilizer, and they'll lodge or tip over.
So Borlaug crossbred his wheat with a dwarf variety from Japan, wheat with really short, fat stems. The result is the modern semi-dwarf, disease-resistant wheat that doesn't fall over. There's a lot of bad things you could say about the Green Revolution, and maybe we'll save them another day, but it is certainly true that Norman Borlaug's work saved the lives of millions and millions of people from famine and from resource wars. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970, and he died at home in Texas in 2009, age 95. Borlaug couldn't save my wheat, though. Again, I actually have no idea what variety this is. It's just feed wheat, and it's not quite dry enough for harvest there, but between the infestation and the fact that I sold that house in Georgia to move up here to Tennessee, well, I decided that it was time to reap what I had sown. Creating things from the earth, that's hard. Creating things from Squarespace, that's in this little stand, there are approximately 50,000 wheat seeds. This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Leave the technicals to only not saying much. It's literally full. In this little stand, there are approximately 50,000 wheat seeds. To make a few loaves of bread, each of those 50,000 seeds has to be removed from the tip of the grass that it's growing on. And then it has to be popped out of its tiny individual wrapping. All 50,000 seeds are encased in what's called a hull or a husk, and each tiny one has to be unwrapped before anybody can eat it. When you consider the scale of the challenge, it's hard to understand how most people for the
Make a fruit blast. Pineapple, lemon, orange, another lemon.
the last 10,000 years or so have survived primarily on grains. And yet when you
An invitation to the most amazing feast I will ever see.
Curious.
It's called Recipe for Disaster because everything goes wrong. This is like the Mega Quest. Welcome, gentlemen, to Lumbridge Castle. Spy Master Valkyrie is here. I did that. I helped him. It's all the member berries. White Wolf Mountain Dwarf. A member.
A member.
Pirate Pete from Brain Death Island. A member. The Chiefs of Goblin Village fighting over a chair. I member. Ogre Chief. I member. The
Pepperidge
Lumbridge,
Farm members.
the Lumbridge Guide, aka Tutorial Man. I remember. Evil Dave from Edgeville. I do not remember. I don't think I've met him. Sir Amic Vers. I think you're spelling Vase. The Sir Amic Vers. And finally, I welcome the ruler of Apatow, Awogwe. I don't want to remember Monkey Madness. I don't want to remember Monkey. Everyone's getting taken away by random events. Culinaromancer. Oh my god, he's owning everyone! Hello, the fortune teller lady just froze time. You must help me defeat this evil.
But first, I need you to do 13 sit-ups and some push-ups. In my mini-game, then talk to the Frog Prince.
What the flipping hippo is going on here? Hello? Let my character say the F word.
No.
The Culinaromancer. 100 years ago, he threatened the Secret Council with death. Okay, this is an interesting form of time stop. It literally only applies to this room, and she says, when you leave the barrier, you go to the world where you already finished beating the Culinaromancer. Easy. Alright, I got my spice that I need for Desert Treasure. I need a garlic. I need to find where the frick I get a garlic. $20 to $50 lockpicks. Oh god. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Spice monger. I'm going into battle and I need a garlic. Alright, I got garlic powder now. Need some bones. Hey you, guard! You've got bones inside you, I'm pretty sure. Merry Christmas. Okay, there's a blood root. That's convenient, blood root. Very convenient. Alright, give me the mess notes. 12. 6 steel bars. Six molten glass. Oh, I actually have to make some. Put the sapphire away. Why is the sapphire in my inventory? Ba-da.
Process grains yourself by hand, you can come to understand how it was possible. I mean, it's a lot of backbreaking work and a lot can go wrong, but it is possible. I'm quite happy to pay farmers to do this for me with modern combines and such, but if you're curious about how this was done the old-fashioned way, come with me. First step, of course, is to get the wheat out of the field, and you have to wait for just the right moment, when the grains have grown to their maximum size and nutrition content, and when the plants have started to dry down. Really, when it's dried down most of the way. If the wheat isn't dry, if it's still a little green, the only way to get the seeds out is literally one at a time with your fingers. That's not gonna scale, as the business school bros say, so you have to let the plant complete its whole life cycle and literally die in the field. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain. You know, I'm not exactly the target market for patriotic songs, but I always liked that one, especially the Amber Waves part, and now I finally understand it. To invoke the image of amber grain is not the same thing as invoking the image of, like, green trees. A field of grain is green most of its life. It only dries and goes amber in the last few weeks before harvest. So to invoke the image of amber grain is to invoke the abundance of the harvest. The song isn't just saying, wow, we grow a lot of grain in America. The song is saying we have a lot of grain that is ripe and ready to be plucked like an apple. If only it were so easy. Farmers traditionally would pull out a single grain and crush it with their thumbnail to assess its ripeness. This is, I think, the late milk stage, when the starchy endosperm is still a little liquid. Here is what I think is the soft dough stage, where the starch is going powdery, that's almost dry enough. If you leave it drying in the field for too long, the heads will shatter. That is, a stiff wind will come by and just blow the seeds off the plant and onto the ground. That is, of course, the goal from the plant's perspective. Its goal is to protect its seed from animals and from the elements until the seed is fully grown, and then it is to drop those seeds into the wind where they can go off and then grow into the next generation. That's what the plant is trying to do. A farmer has to wait for just the right moment when the plant is about to shatter, but it hasn't quite shattered yet. And over thousands of years, farmers crossbred and selected for varieties that dried out but resisted shattering for at least a few weeks, giving you some kind of window in which to gather up a massive labor force, wait for the right weather, go out there and reap the harvest. Still, there was and is a lot of urgency to the harvest. It has to be done at just the right time and done really quickly. Here's one for you, Brits. In the year 1066, the last Anglo-Saxon king of England, Harold Godwinson, knew that William of Normandy was planning an invasion. Harold gathered an army and a fleet of ships, and he hung out on the south coast, waiting all summer for William to cross the channel and attack. William never came, but September did. And Harold had to let most of his men go. They needed to get back to their farms to gather in the harvest of summer wheat before it shattered right there in the fields, fell onto the ground, and germinated. If that had happened, they would have had a great head start on the winter wheat planting, but they would have had nothing to eat in the meantime. What's the point of winning the war if you're all gonna starve? With Harold's fleet disbanded and his army elsewhere, William was able to cross the channel, establish a beachhead at Pevensey, and the rest is history, which you could learn about on Audible, the sponsor of this video. Whether I'm cooking in the kitchen or digging in the garden, this is gonna be my new vegetable garden, Audible is an amazing way for me to stay informed and entertained while I'm doing something else.
One by one, the several kingdoms of the Anglo-Saxons fell.
Audible is the leading provider of spoken audio content. History audiobooks are generally my jam these days, but they got fiction, everything, including the latest bestsellers. With an Audible membership, you get a credit to download one premium title a month, and then you own it. You also get unlimited access to the Plus catalog, which is basically everything beyond the latest bestsellers, all the back catalog stuff, plus Audible original programs, guided fitness and meditation, ad-free versions of top podcasts, unlimited access to all of that with your Audible membership. New members can try it for free for 30 days with my link in the description, audible.com/Adam Ragusea. Or you can text Adam Ragusea to 500-500. Try Audible for free for 30 days with my link in the description. Thank you, Audible. Imagine if ancient people could have listened to books while they reaped the harvest. I suppose it would have been noisy, as the harvest was an all-hands-on-deck affair. You need a huge crew out there with sickles. A sickle, of course, is this curved blade, and you kind of swipe at the base of the straw, and the sickle gathers up the straw into a nice tidy little bunch before it then cuts them off at the base. And then with the other hand, you grab that little bunch, and there you go. You have a nice tidy what's called a shock of wheat. When the Soviets were choosing a farm implement to represent the rural peasantry in their alliance with the industrial proletariat, the sickle was the perfect choice, way better than something like a plow. As we discussed previously in the Part 1 video that is linked in the description, planting wheat is actually not that much work. If I'm a landowner, I can plant my own grain field myself, or maybe with my sons, or with a small group of hired hands. Once it's time to harvest the wheat, however, you need a giant crew of people to get down on their hands and knees with scythes. This is one reason why it behooved landowners to maintain a perpetual landless underclass who would show up and do the job at exactly the right time. The sickle is the tool of those poor bastards. No wonder they eventually stood up and reaped the bourgeoisie's heads instead. I could not use a sickle though myself because my wheat had lodged or fallen over. We talked about this last time, how important it was that in the 20th century people invented these modern semi-dwarf wheat varieties that will not fall over. If the wheat is lodged in a tangled mass on the ground, really the only way to get it up is to reach down with a knife or clippers or something and cut a few stems at a time. Then you gotta straighten them out and then stack them up into neat little shocks, pretty much one at a time. It took me half a day to get my little stand harvested, and boy did my back hurt at the end. Oh hey, check it out, oats. I planted the only wheat I could find, which was just a bag of animal feed wheat, and it was clearly a mash of all kinds of random things, including oats. Oats have these kind of elegant dangly heads, and the seeds inside are super long and pointy before they are steamed and rolled flat into instant oatmeal.
Alright, I think I've got... Oh no, okay, I need to go look at that last thing, but I think I'm good otherwise. Anything I don't have, I can get later.
Time now to thresh the wheat, that is to knock the seeds off of the straw, to shatter those heads. One precision method that I've seen for this is to put your shock head first into some kind of sack. I'm using a pillowcase. Then you bash the heads like they owe your boss money. You like to play the ponies, huh? Then theoretically, you can just pull out the bunch of decapitated straw and your shattered wheat is contained in the sack. I got hardly anything by using this method, and I got the feeling I was going to expend more calories than I created. The problem was that it wasn't dry enough. I needed to dry or cure my wheat until it was brittle enough that those heads would just break apart much more easily. Farmers traditionally did this out in the fields in rows of cut straw called windrows, or maybe in stacks of shocks with their heads up where they won't get wet and start germinating in the ground. I just laid my crop out on my front walkway and let them dry in the brutal southern sun, which it did. This also had the advantage of killing or driving away the thousands and thousands of aphids and other bugs who had infested my wheat. They were all gone after a week of drying, and my wheat seemed like it would shatter much more easily. But I decided against the pillowcase method because I didn't want my neighbors to call the cops on me, and also because I wanted to do it the way that most ancient people would have done it, the way that you can scale up into proto-mass production to feed a whole village. Let's call it the kill 'em all and let God sort 'em out method. You just bash up the wheat on a piece of flat ground known as a threshing floor. You smash it, you step on it, you throw it around, whatever. Just cause as much destruction as you can right down there on the ground. The most effective technique that I found was to grind everything against the ground with my hands, though I got a lot of splinters in my hands doing that because each grain is connected to a long hair-like thing called an awn, that is the wheat's beard. If you look really closely, those hairs are like serrated knives. These are supposed to help the seed kind of hook itself into the ground and get established. But I still have a lot of these little guys embedded in my skin. You can see why people invented all kinds of tools for just smashing the wheat on the threshing floor. And once you've completely pulverized it, you sweep it up with a broom. And where, historically speaking, would you have gotten a broom? The seeds are way heavier, smoother, and smaller, so they sink to the bottom of that pile as you sweep. You can just lift the straw up off the top and stack it. And right there you can see why grain agriculture historically went hand in glove with animal agriculture. Most of what we've created here is cellulose, a carbohydrate that humans can't digest, but some animals can. Feed the straw to them. And if you're like me, you've always wondered about these words. Straw is the stemmy byproduct of grain cultivation. Hay is a similar thing, but it's not a byproduct. Hay is a crop you grow just so you can cut it down, let it dry, and roll it up and feed it to the animals, seeds and all. Speaking of nomenclature, let's resume our list from the last video where we are counting up common words or phrases that have their origin in the cultivation of grains, because it is time to winnow our wheat, winnow it down. We got to remove all of the stuff in here that is not stuff we want to eat, most notably the hull. That's what these little parchments are there, the husk, the hull. It's just indigestible cellulose. And with ripe, modern bread wheat varieties, the hull just falls off during the threshing phase. That was not always the case. Dr. Catherine Zabinski of Montana State University writes about this in her book, Amber Waves, The Extraordinary Biography of Wheat.
The earliest wheats that were used, emmer and einkorn, they had one more thick protective layer that you would first have to use something like a mortar and pestle and pound it off. Or, you know, you could soak them and you could char them over a fire, and then they would more easily pound off. And then what you would have left is that hard seed. So one of the reasons that bread wheat and durum really took off was that hard layer, the hull. It's still present, but they're really fragile. Like it's just easily dropped. You don't have to think too much about it.
You do have to think about how you get it out of your pile, but this part is surprisingly easy. Traditionally, you would wait for a windy day, then you would just throw the wheat into the air. I didn't have time to wait for that, so I got out my box fan and dropped the wheat in front of it. The heavy aerodynamic seeds fall straight down, while the papery hulls and tiny bits of straw just blow away. It's really pretty remarkable. You have to do it several times, but very gradually you separate the wheat from the chaff. That chaff is also considered high-grade animal feed. And there's also probably a lot of stray seeds just hanging out there on the threshing floor. Rather than let them go to waste, you could bring your chickens over and let them glean the threshing floor. Let them eat whatever you can't eat so that you can then eat them. Works. I still have lots of big pieces of straw and maybe some rocks and stuff in there, so I needed to winnow this down further. A pizza screen was the perfect filter for getting out anything bigger than a kernel of wheat. And then I used a sieve, a fine screen, to get out anything smaller than a kernel. Look at all that sand from the threshing floor, yikes. My yield from a 50 square foot stand of wheat was almost 4 pounds of whole grain wheat, which is not bad, though keep in mind you'd have to set a lot of that aside for planting the next crop. The easiest way to eat all of those grains would be to boil them into a porridge. But you gotta remember that humans started eating grains long before they invented water and fire-safe vessels in which to cook food, cook wet food. So really their only option was to grind it down into a digestible powder, flour. Historically, this was an incredibly laborious process involving stone tools that I was not up for, so blender. You can't get as fine a grain with a blender as you get with real milling tools, but that's not bad. Coarse ground whole wheat flour, the original flour for the original bread. As I was kneading it, I could tell that I had very little gluten in there, the proteins that make doughs and bread stretchy and elastic. This means I might have gotten some soft wheat in my feed bag as opposed to hard wheat, high protein wheat for bread making. It may also mean that much of what was in that bag was actually barley, a grain that is virtually identical to wheat but has a lot less gluten. Anyway, this loaf was pretty crumbly, not very fluffy or chewy, and speaking of texture, it was full of sand from my front walkway. Edible, but pretty disgusting. Historically, how did people winnow out all of the sand and dirt from their threshing floor?
They didn't. Their teeth were terrible. They had pocked teeth all the time. And think about this. If you actually, instead of putting it in your blender, which doesn't fall apart when you use it, you had one rock that you used to grind your seeds on top of another rock. They had, you know, little rock fragments mixed in with their wheat all the time. So, you know, really a good indication of ancient people eating wheat is their teeth are terrible with, you know, little nicks out of them everywhere.
Personally, I'd much rather boil my grains into a soup or a porridge, but that would have to wait for the invention of pottery, which is an incredibly momentous event in the history of food that we'll talk about another day. Farming mushrooms is very different from farming nearly any other kind of food. This is food. That might be kind of hard to believe if, like me, you don't come from a culture where people eat cactus. But nearly every part of this plant is edible and potentially quite tasty. There are obviously hazards both glaring and insidious. I'm going to tell you everything I learned trying to prepare this very angry plant for human consumption. Parts of me still hurt. Lots of cacti have edible parts, but this is a classic, a prickly pear. Known to science as the Opuntia genus, it's named after the city of Opus in ancient Greece, which was reputed to have an edible plant that could be grown by simply jamming its leaves into the ground. The leaves would send out roots. And indeed, you can grow prickly pear that way. Just take basically any chunk of the plant, stick it in the ground, and it can send out roots. However, this almost certainly was not the plant in ancient Opus that Theophrastus wrote about. Why? Because like most cactuses, Opuntia is native to the Americas, and that genus includes hundreds of distinct species, abundant across the warmer parts of the Western Hemisphere, very big in Latin American cuisine. I have no idea which particular species of prickly pear this is, because it's just a random plant hanging out in my neighborhood in Macon, Georgia, in front of this vacant lot. The house here burned down a few years ago. Whomever lived here many decades ago planted this cactus right on the border with their neighbor, which tells you a lot about what their relationship must have been like. I've walked by that plant thousands of times, and like half of the year it has these big purple fruits on it. And they are true fruits, berries. They have soft, sweet and sour flesh containing a pulpy core of little seeds. In Spanish, they call the fruit tuna, no etymological relation.
Oh, good. Some of Ivan's favorite things. He's posting about stuff in trails. Technology for orbital cars is only 10 years old, and the requirement for a driver's license is to just ask for one.
That doesn't make any sense. Why would they already have licenses? Especially if they don't do anything?
No, you have to ask for your license.
Surely they're gonna make me leave to get some ashes. Is there a tree I could cut down? No, I suppose not. There's no way.
To tuna fish, as far as I can tell. Applied to cactus fruit, tuna is a word of indigenous American origin. The tuna grow up from the outer leaves called paddles or pads, or in Spanish, nopales. Both the tuna and the nopales are edible, but are best at different times of the year. The tuna generally ripen in the fall. It's actually winter here right now. It's New Year's Day as I record this, and there's still a ton of fruit ripening on that plant. Most people seem to agree the best paddles, or nopales, are the new growth paddles that sprout up in the springtime. Those are lighter green and more tender than the mature paddles that we see on here right now. You can tell the tuna are ripe when they are, of course, no longer green, like that one, and when they twist almost effortlessly off the plant. Yeah, twisting I found is the motion you want to use, not pulling. And yes, for God's sake, use tongs. The first time I tried to harvest fruit from that thing, I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. I can see the spines really, really clearly. All I have to do is just kind of grab between the spines. Bad idea, because lurking around all those big conspicuous thorns are many more nearly microscopic ones called glochids or glochidia. And these are hairy little demons straight from the fires of Hades. They are the worst. Some varieties of prickly pear have more glochids than others, and it may depend on the season, but basically anytime I've gotten near that thing, I have noticed some weird telltale pains later. If you look with a much more powerful microscope, you can see the glochids are barbed. All you have to do is brush past them and they'll hook into your skin and release from the plant. You might not even notice them going in, and even if you do, yeah, you can pull out the part that's above the skin, but not the barbed tips. They just break off and stay inside you. And what does that feel like? Well, I've got one in the tip of this finger right now. And I don't feel it at all unless pressure is applied. Then I feel this minor but sharp pain. That made typing this script this morning a lot of fun. I also always notice this generalized dull aching in my skin, like a hand ache, and it takes a few days to go away. This may be due to a general inflammation or dermatitis caused by glochids. Some people seem to have a particularly strong reaction to them. And if you just carelessly brush past one of these plants when you're out hiking or something, you could just instantaneously be covered in millions of these little glochids. It's gonna be a problem. In the 1980s, some researchers at the St. Louis College of Pharmacy found that you can almost entirely prevent the inflammation by immediately removing the exposed part of the glochids with tweezers and then applying a household glue, letting it dry, and then ripping it off. You basically give your glochid tips a bikini wax. Just use tongs. Tongs are good. And right now, I bet some of you are thinking, I'd rather just buy some food at the grocery store. You know, food that isn't trying to kill me. Well, I say go for it, friend. And just remember to scan your grocery receipt with the sponsor of this video, Fetch Rewards, whom I'll now thank. My code, imagine how 4,000 feel on your skin. A subscription, a limited time offer just for you. Thanks, Fetch. Now, as bad as glochids feel on your skin, imagine how they would feel on your tongue or in your throat. Let's talk about how you actually eat these. A popular method among hikers is to eat them right off the plant. You grab a stick and just poke the blossom end of the fruit with it, just to hold it steady. There's a little belly button there that you can poke. Then you just fillet off the sides of skin with your knife. I've read in several botanical texts that ripe fruits will drop their glochids. They'll drop when they're really ripe. For what it's worth, there's lots of clearly very ripe fruit out on that plant right now, and they still have tons of glochids on them. To the point where I needed to wipe the loose glochids off my knife before I proceeded with this step, where you just fillet the edible flesh right off the seed core in the middle. The seeds aren't poisonous or anything, but they are very hard. You can't crunch through them like papaya seeds. What does it taste like? Purple. I think it tastes purple. It has a generic fruity taste, but also a slight vegetal taste as well, which I actually quite like. Oh lordy, there's a thorn, there's a thorn! Ah! No, I'm just kidding. The less ripe ones are way more acidic, but devotees will know that's just fine with me. Very nice. But truthfully, there just really isn't that much fruity flesh on this thing. So much of it is those pulpy seeds. So something that people do a lot of the time is simply juice it, because there's tons of good juice in that pulp. Problem is, you can't just wash them and toss them in a blender. The skin has all those glochids in it, and they're small enough to pass through a strainer and into your juice. Now, I've seen some people simply grab the fruit with tongs, put it under running water, and just scrub away at it with a really stiff scrubby. Then you just have to wash and rinse it several times to make sure you have washed away all the loose glochids. Maybe that works with the store-bought variety, which I've noticed seem to have fewer glochids on them, but these are just covered in them, so we have to do something else. An ancient method among indigenous peoples is apparently to roll the fruit fruits around in sand quite vigorously. The abrasive sand theoretically dislodges all the prickles, and then you can wash them off. Theoretically. Another traditional method is to kill them with fire. Now we're talking. If you look really close, you can actually see the glochids igniting and shriveling up. People who have gas stoves often do this over the flame from their burner. That'd probably work a lot better than this little fire stick. My kitchen torch is out of butane. This is gonna take forever. You know what we need? Now we're talking. Yeah, die glochids, die. The campfire is apparently a traditional method as well. Just don't keep them in the heat for too long or they will burst open. Then you can bring them inside and wash them off. And people say you can then just cut them in half and simply peel the skin off with your fingers. That did not work too well for me. It would have helped if I'd trimmed off the blossom and stem ends first. The skin really sticks around there. I found the easiest thing for me was to hold the fruit upright with a fork and fillet off the skin. I imagine peeling with your fingers works better with the bigger store-bought fruit. Then you could mash them up by hand or just drop them in a blender or a food processor. People usually put in a little water just to help everything flow around the blades and whiz it smooth. Strain out the seeds and pulp, and there you have it. People will boil that down and make candies with it, or they'll just stir in some simple syrup, maybe some lime juice, and there you have a lovely little soft drink, agua fresca de tuna. I am simply going to spike mine with a little tequila and call it a day. Is it worth it? I'm not so sure. Is it delicious? Absolutely. Oh, the paddles. The fresh nopales I see for sale in Latin grocery stores seem to only have the big, conspicuous thorns that you can easily shave off with a knife. This one from the plant up the street has got tons of glochids on it too, so kill them with fire. Die, die. Yeah, you could just shave them off with the skin, but when they inevitably fall off in the process, they would get stuck in that very sticky flesh. Nopales are filled with mucilage, that gluey polysaccharide.
Okay, so I brought this. I bring some stamina potions or energy potions. Sure. Paul Nimnich.
That makes okra slimy. Texture-wise, the slime does not bother me much at all when eating it raw, and I do very much like it raw. If the tuna, or the fruit, is sort of a vegetal-tasting fruit, the paddles, the nopales, are to me kind of sort of a fruity-tasting vegetable. It's like if green beans were a sour fruit, though apparently if you harvest the pads in the morning, their acid content will be lower. The slime becomes much more unpleasant to me when you cook these. In Mexican food, a lot of the times they will boil these and then strain and wash them to get a lot of that slime out. Well prepared, they make a very tasty taco filling. I have not well prepared them. But there you have it. Be safe and go taste of the forbidden fruit if you dare. This video is sponsored by
I like gardening, but even I will admit that growing your own vegetables can be kind of pointless. I mean, when you factor in your time and all your costs, you're probably not saving any money, and it can be hard to grow something that's better than what you can buy at a really good grocery store. But there is one huge exception to that rule, and that is the tomato. Unless you've had a great garden-grown tomato, I think it's very likely you've never experienced what a tomato can truly be. There are three big factors that tend to ruin commercially grown tomatoes: how they're bred, when they're picked, and how they're handled. All three factors stem from the same core problem, which is that tomatoes are not vegetables. They're berries, and like all berries, they're crazy delicate when they're ripe. A tomato can look fire engine red on the vine, but that doesn't mean it's really ripe. Here's how my dad taught me how to do it. He said when the tomato is really ready, it should leap out into your hand. If you have to tug on them hard, they're not ready yet. Really good berries of all kinds tend to be right on the edge of rotting, which is why pick-your-own strawberries tend to be so much better. Here, look, here's two tomatoes of similar variety. Vine-ripened garden tomato is on the right. They look similar on the outside, but look inside. The really ripe one almost looks like it's bleeding, and the flavor and texture is far superior to the grocery store tomato on the left. A tomato this ripe can be a challenge to get from the garden to the kitchen without squishing it. So it's no surprise that commercial growers pick their fruit way sooner, typically when it's still mostly green. Tomatoes do continue to ripen off the vine, but they don't develop the same flavor. The soil, the plant, the sun, the rain, they all continue to affect the tomato's flavor as it ripens on the plant, in the garden, on the vine. I think this is why even beautiful heirloom varieties that I've gotten at farmers markets still aren't as good as the things I grow myself in my garden. It's just commercial suicide to try to bring a tomato to market that is leap into your hand ripe. But even when allowed to ripen on the vine, the big commercial tomato varieties still have really inferior flavor. That's according to research done by Dr. Denise Tiemann and her colleagues at the University of Florida. There's a whole lab there dedicated to improving the flavor of commercial tomato cultivars.
They've been bred for many, many years now for a lot of commercial traits, including shelf life and disease resistance. And all those things are important, and we wouldn't have tomatoes in the grocery store year-round if we didn't have all those things. But unfortunately, in the process of breeding for all those traits, we've lost a lot of the flavor. And it wasn't a conscious thing, it just happened.
And one reason why that may have happened is that the flavor compounds in tomatoes are really complex. Dr. Tiemann and friends have identified literally dozens of distinct compounds that make tomatoes taste tomato-y. This is in contrast to, say, the banana.
For like bananas, it's one compound. You can smell that compound.
This compound, isoamyl acetate, you find the gene that makes that and you can breed a super banana-y banana. Tomatoes are way harder. Certainly there is one simple thing that makes tomatoes taste good, and that is their natural sugar content. But even that is lacking in the big commercial varieties. And by big, I mean big literally. Growers like big fruit.
That's another thing that we found is that, yes, there is an inverse correlation between size and sugar content. We don't know exactly the basis for that, but that is the case.
This is why if you're going to buy fresh tomatoes from the grocery store, I think you're often better off buying the little cherry or grape tomato varieties that come in plastic bins. These tend to be a lot sweeter, and at least that's something. But if you grow your own tomatoes, you don't have to grow the big commercial varieties. You can grow the old varieties, what we call heirlooms, because they've been saved by gardeners who pass the seeds from generation to generation, like family heirlooms. My favorite is the Cherokee Purple. Look at that thing. In 1990, a gardener in Tennessee mailed a packet of those seeds to heirloom tomato evangelist Craig LaHoulier, and now you can buy little Cherokee Purple seedlings at any garden store. But I can see why it's not a big grocery store variety. The plants only produce like 3 or 4 fruits each. That's why I don't even have one to hold as a prop for you right now. I ate them all. I'm hoping I'll get some more from these younger plants over here. So when you grow your own tomatoes, you can grow the good ones, you can pick them when they're actually ripe, and third and finally, you can avoid common handling mistakes, namely refrigeration.
It's the other problem. A lot of the tomatoes are chilled, and we've also done a study on that, and we found that it actually changes the DNA when they're chilled. The DNA becomes methylated, which shuts off the genes for a lot of the flavor compounds, and that can't be reversed once they've been chilled. And so you should never refrigerate your tomatoes.
That's no problem for me. Let me show you my favorite thing to eat in the entire world. Some tomatoes from the backyard, still warm from the summer sun. Cut up a nice variety, some red ones, some yellow ones. There's that Cherokee Purple again. That beefsteak tomato looks awesome, but I think I'll save it for another day. Just throw them on a plate, drizzle over some extra virgin olive oil, and grind on some pepper. I don't do salt. Mine always seem to have sufficient natural salt inside them. Maybe that's just my soil. And if I'm feeling crazy, I might tear on a little bit of basil, but that is it. No cheese, no bread, just tomatoes. If this seems puzzling to you, I really think it may just be that you've been deprived of truly great tomatoes your whole life, and for that you have my sympathies. Even if you grow nothing else, try growing your own tomatoes. You can do it in pots. I swear, it is worth it. This
might be. Oh, we'll see. This isn't too bad. Character I'd very much like if you would hit him. There you go. Just gotta ask nice. Okay, two more times. Two more times, girly. There we go. Okay, got the Diamond of Smoke. Bring anti-poison, food, and as many lockpicks as you can to the bandit camp. That's how you know you're in for a treat. that away. Let's put some of these in here. We don't need the tinderbox anymore. We can probably put this away. Leave the money out. Grab some picklocks. It's an anti-poison. And another picklock. Alright. If this ends up easy to pick, I'm gonna be very disappointed.
Is food. That might be kind of hard to believe if, like me, you don't come from a culture where... So you've got your tomatoes in the ground or in your pots. Now what do you do? Well, the first thing to do is to tie and prune them as they grow. Tomatoes are vines and they will naturally fall over and snake across the ground if you let them. So if you're using stakes, you have to come out and tie them to the stake every now and then as they get taller. Some people say elastic is the perfect tying string, but I don't want to have to recover a bunch of synthetic material from inside my garden at the end of the season. I just use a biodegradable garden twine, and you want to tie it loosely. If the string is too tight, it'll cut off the plant's circulation. Remember to give it room to grow. If you're using cages rather than stakes, you don't have to tie anything. However, you do have to make sure that your plants don't escape the cage like that. If you let it go, eventually it'll stick way out of the middle of the cage and the stem will be too thick and rigid for you to bend and thread it back in without breaking it. If this happens to you, you can kind of tie it to the cage, but better to keep it from happening in the first place. Just guide them up through the cages as they grow. Time to think about pruning. What should you cut off and what should you leave behind? Let's consult arguably the most prominent tomato gardener of our time, Dr. Craig LaHoulier. This is the person most singularly responsible for the widespread resurgence of heirloom tomato varieties that actually taste like something, as opposed to the flavorless commercial varieties that we get at the grocery store. LaHoulier is legit the LeBron James of tomato gardeners, and here's what he has to say about pruning.
The only wrong way to do it would be if you start pruning determinate varieties, because determinants only grow a certain amount of feet, put out a lot of flowers, and if you prune flowers off, you'll just severely curtail your yield. So determinants and dwarfs, no pruning.
Determinate varieties, remember, are the ones that generally grow better in pots because they grow to a fixed size, they flower, fruit, and then stop. LaHoulier says don't prune those at all, unless you have some stems that are looking yellow, diseased. Get those off, but we'll come back to that subject. Indeterminate varieties are the ones we generally grow in the ground. They generally taste better, but they require more attention, and that...
That was not as bad as I was told.
that can include pruning. A common thing to do is to remove what are known as suckers or side shoots. You will see them growing in the joints between the stem and the branches. Left unpruned, this sucker will grow into a whole new main stem with its own branches. They can cause the plants to grow out of control, really wide. The plants would grow too close to each other, which would inhibit air circulation and encourage disease. So, some people pinch off the suckers when they arise. LaHoulier is a fan of leaving at least some of the suckers alone.
I like to tell people that if they're staking a tomato, tying it to a 7 or 8 foot stake, leave 2 or 3 suckers, because that means you'll get 2 or 3 times more potential tomatoes than if you were to just go to a central stem.
Desert treasure, okay. So it basically says to mage. Just in case, I guess. Take this here. King's necklace. So we have some fish. Some prayer pots. Then how many? Oh, we still have plenty of those. Okay, we're gonna blast him. We're gonna blast that guy, this guy. He's not even gonna know what to freaking hit him. Okay. Ugh.
The problem with large fruited tomatoes, most people these days love to grow the big monster heirloom types, is when the temperature gets at 90 or above under high humidity, they'll start dropping blossoms.
AKA the flowers, which is where the tomatoes come from.
So let's have a hypothetical. You have a plant and you prune all the suckers off, so you have this 8-foot plant that's going to have flower clusters every 10 inches or so. Let's say you have a lot of 90-degree days and those flowers shrivel up and drop off without pollinating. You could conceivably have an 8-foot plant with 2 tomatoes on it. If you let one sucker grow, the odds are the weather will be favorable during when that's blooming and you double your potential yield. Another sucker, triple your potential yield. People who cage their tomatoes really don't need to sucker at all and just let that plant grow like crazy,
And there you have it. That's pruning for controlling growth. There is, however, another kind of pruning, which is pruning for controlling disease. If you see branches that look like they're dying, snap them off. At best, these are simply unviable branches that are diverting water and nutrients from the viable parts of the plant. At worst, they have blight, which is a broad category of fungal diseases. To contain the spread of blight, you snap off the dying branch and you get it out of your garden, throw it someplace else. But another way to control blight is to use mulch, and Lahulier says he is a mulch man all day long.
The reason being there is so much bad stuff in the soil, and everybody has to deal with tomato diseases. The source and the vector for introduction of many...
Okay, I need to open up the picture here. Frick out of here. Whew. spice my garlic powder.
Any of those, especially the foliage-borne fungal diseases, is splashing of the foliage up onto the lower leaves of the plant. So you'll grow a tomato in a garden. And you'll have grown things there in the past, so these fungal diseases build up. You get a heavy rain, splashes on the leaves. About a few days later, you go out and you start seeing the brown patches growing on the leaves with the yellow rings around them. So mulching conserves water loss. It keeps the soil-borne fungal spores in the soil and off the plants, and it provides a little early season warmth.
You can use tons of things for mulch. Lahulier likes untreated grass clippings. I'm using wheat straw, which is cheap and easy to apply. Anyway, look at this now. As it rains, the mulch keeps the mud from splashing up onto the plant. Speaking of rain, let's talk about watering. This will obviously depend a lot on your climate, but you probably want to make sure that your plants get some water at least a couple of times a week. If it doesn't rain, water them yourself. A good time to water is the morning. That way the water won't all immediately evaporate in the hot afternoon sun. But at the same time, the sun will come out eventually and evaporate any water that's just sitting on the leaves and that could become a petri dish for disease. If you water in the evening, you could end up with water sitting on the leaves all night long, and that's not good. Another way to prevent that is to simply water the base of the plants one by one. That's a little more labor intensive, but it allows you to water the plants whenever you want if they're wilting and looking stressed, which is important. Blossom end rot can be caused not only by unbalanced soil pH, but also by insufficient water.
People letting their plants dry out to the point of wilting on a hot day, and then the calcium transport is disturbed in the plant because of that stress. When you water, the plant recovers, but the blossom end rot's already there.
But keeping your plants watered regularly should keep them safe, just as you can keep yourself safe with the sponsor of this video, Surfshark. Surfshark is really a whole suite of tools to help you secure your online life. It is a VPN, virtual private network. If you're ever on someone else's Wi-Fi, this is a way to keep other people on the network from snooping on you. You just open the app and hit connect, and you can hook up through any of Surfshark's servers all around the world. But that's not all. Off if you hit code, really sucking nutrient-rich moisture right out of my plant. There's a couple things you could try. You can spray with an insecticidal soap. It's literally just a soap solution. It disrupts the cellular membranes of the bugs and kills them. If you get any soap on your fruit, remember to wash it off. Soap is a digestive irritant in people. Another thing that you can try is diatomaceous earth. This is the pulverized fossilized remains of microalgae called diatoms. When it gets on bugs, it dries them out and kills them. I think this is what Vito Corleone is spraying in The Godfather right before he dies while chasing his grandson through his tomato plants, which I know is how I hope to go out. There are much more effective, yet much less wholesome pesticides you can use, but such things generally aren't necessary for tomatoes, which can tolerate having a few buggies on them and which simply don't have to live that long. It's not like a tree. You only have to get these through one season and then you start again. When your plants start to flower and fruit, you'll want to start fertilizing them again, once every week or so. This will help you get a lot more tomatoes. You can use compost, or there are tons of tomato foods you can buy. Liquid ones are probably easier to apply, but I'm just sprinkling in a little of my 10, 10, and 10 into the soil around the plant's base. Don't get it too close to the stem. If it touches the stem, it can chemically burn it. If anything, I put this a little too close. 6 inches from the stem is safer. It would probably be better if I got like a 5, 10, and 10 fertilizer for this, that is to say one with less nitrogen. Too much nitrogen will give you lots of foliage, but not much actual fruit. Any tomato feed product you buy will be formulated thusly. As your fruit grow, regular watering becomes all the more important. If the plants are really dry for a week and then they get a big rain, the fruit will grow faster than the skin cells can divide and multiply, and the skins will split. That's what that is. That is not what this is. This is the work of a goddamn bird. As soon as your fruits start to look beautifully red and ripe, they will look not only very attractive to you, they will also look attractive to all kinds of other animals.
So this goes for birds, this goes for squirrels, this goes for deer. They're waiting. You can almost hear them strategizing at night. You know, they've got the little maps drawn. They know where the neighborhood is.
For years, I would put up tomato netting at this point. The problem is that if you don't perfectly seal it all the way around, birds will still get in there and then they get trapped, which is sad. LeHoulier says there is another way.
What I've discovered over the last maybe 6 years or so is that a tomato picked at half ripeness, brought in the house within 2 days, reaches the full ripeness and quality that it would reach if it was sitting on the plant. So I've started picking my tomatoes, maybe half to 3/4. They're blushing strongly, but I bring them in.
This is hard for me to accept. I have always believed that one reason grocery store tomatoes taste like nothing is because they are picked totally green or at the breaker stage, when there's just a tiny little bit of color on them. The fruits are much more firm at this point and are much more shippable, and their color can develop off the vine, but less so the flavor. That all may be true, but LeHoulier is convinced that the primary reason grocery store tomatoes taste like nothing is because of their breeding, not because of when they're picked. He says you can take a 3/4 ripe tomato off the vine before the critters start to eat it, before the skin splits from sudden rain, and you can bring it in, let it ripen a few days inside, it'll be just as good. And gosh darn it, I think he might be right. Though, this is one of my early fruiting varieties, which generally don't taste as good. These cherry varieties taste better, but they never make it inside. I just snack on them in the backyard. Let's get some of these bad boys, these midsummer guys. That's the Cherokee Purple right there, my favorite tomato. Craig LeHoulier personally got these reintroduced to the market after a gardener in East Tennessee sent him some seeds that purportedly went back to the Cherokee Indians in the area, and yep, after sitting on the windowsill for a few days, that is pretty great. So, Now all you have to do is pick, ripen, and enjoy. As the plants grow beyond their support structures, you'll want to top them. That is to say, cut them off right at the top. The vines are just going to flop over at that point. Their circulation will be cut off and they won't grow much fruit. Better to direct that energy to the fruit lower down the vine. This is the main reason why you want to buy very tall stakes and very tall cages. The tallest you can find. I need taller cages. When the season is over, you want to pull out the plants and dispose of them elsewhere. Leaving them in the garden will just concentrate disease in your soil that could doom next year's crop. We might talk more later about how to get the garden ready for next year. But for now, let me leave you with...
This video is sponsored by Audible. Hey, what even are truffles? And why are people so obsessed with them? And to be clear, I'm talking about the edible fungus that's referred to as a truffle, not the chocolate that's named after the fungus. People are obsessed with these, and I mean, for reference, I paid about $35 for each of these little burgundy truffles, and this is not even a very highly prized species. The burgundy truffles are just what's in season right now in the fall. It's what I could get. A true black truffle, or Perigord, is probably the most popular species. That's a winter truffle, and it's got a lot stronger flavor. For me to get a nice black Perigord truffle about this size from the same place online, it would cost about $60 for just a little one like that. To get a white truffle about this size would cost about $250. And that's when you can even get them. Look, I'm not here to convince you these little funguses are definitely worth it. I'm just here to explain what the deal is, why truffles are incredibly hard to cultivate, and why people go mad for them. Also, why you need adorable little doggies to find them for you.
Schmuzzles! Find it!
Schmuzzles! The dog's cue word to go find truffles is schmuzzles. Truffles are from a genus of fungal species known as tuber that grow around the base of trees. Healthy, living trees. This is really different from other mushrooms we eat that grow through dead wood and leaves and such. Those are scavengers of the forest. Truffles don't eat dead trees. Instead, they live with trees. That's why you can't grow them in big blocks of sawdust or compost inside like you can with other mushrooms.
Truffles are a unique type of fungus. They're mycorrhizal.
Okay, so let's see. Magic, you say? I can do magic again. Grab some food just in case. He has 200 HP, but I'm not sure how scared I actually need to be, because I have... Yeah, I'm not gonna worry about it. Nope. So Kratos basically. Oh. Okay. No, don't mind me. Just when I just really went across this bridge like a dozen times. I just have to protect from melee now, yeah. Okay. Alright, we got prayer pots, we got food, we got a blast. Ready to have a blast. Why do I feel like I'm over prepared for this? You can't ever freaking tell in this goddamn game. Okay. Kill this man. Whatever, Windows. Stop popping things up when I'm in combat. God damn. GG. Easy. Alright, I'm not going to do the next part because it said this is probably the hardest part. Alright, bye, Shri.